My daughter-in-law posted on Instagram that the family was better off without me. The relatives hit like and cheered her on for her so-called courage. I didn't argue, didn't comment, didn't call. I just dialed one number. 20 minutes later, that dream job she'd been talking about for months, it was gone. The red light on my coffee maker was blinking when I saw the notification pop up on my tablet. Finally blocked my toxic mother-in-law. The family's so much better without her drama. It was from Brooke, my daughter-in-law. Hearts and thumbs-up emojis were already piling up from distant relatives. I didn't feel angry. Just this cool, crystal-clear calm that settled over me like frost on a quiet morning. My house sits in a beautiful tree-lined neighborhood along the river in Seattle's Magnolia area, the kind of spot with big views and even bigger property taxes. It had been quiet since my husband passed 2 years ago. My son Ryan and Brooke lived upstairs in the in-law suite. Back then, it seemed like a smart, practical setup to help them get on their feet. Lately, though, in Brooke's eyes, I'd gone from generous homeowner to that annoying roommate who just wouldn't stay in her lane. They'd been living there rent-free while I covered the property taxes, insurance, and all the upkeep. Brooke would roll her eyes and complain about my controlling energy if I simply asked them not to leave shoes scattered in the hallway. That morning, she'd gone too far. She figured I was just some fragile widow who puttered around the garden and didn't understand the real world. What she'd forgotten, I'd spent 30 years as head of HR for one of the biggest logistics companies on the West Coast. I knew power, reputation, and consequences better than she knew her Instagram filters. I scrolled through her post. She went on about liberation and setting boundaries. She had no clue she was sawing off the very branch she was sitting on. I set my coffee cup down, picked up my phone, and made the call. No yelling, no tears. Emotions are lousy advisors in business and in life. I didn't need lawyers. I just needed my old network. I dialed my longtime colleague, Dr. Harlan, now on the board at the agency where Brooke was supposed to start on Monday. "Hey, Harlan, it's Evelyn," I said, calmly, staring out at the water. Harlan sounded genuinely happy to hear from me. We caught up for a minute on old times before I got to the point. "You just hired a new marketing director, Brooke Caldwell. She's my daughter-in-law." There was a short pause. He knew I never called without a reason. "Yeah, sharp woman, from what I hear. Why do you ask?" I kept my voice even. There's a pretty big gap between how she presents herself publicly and how she behaves privately. We've got an internal conflict here that could poison the atmosphere in my own home and down the line. Maybe even touch your firm's reputation. I never mentioned the Instagram post. In those circles, a quiet hint about discretion and reliability is plenty. A company like his wanted loyalty, not someone who aired family laundry online for likes. "I understand, Evelyn," he said after a beat. "If you have concerns, we take them seriously. We're still in the final prep stage. I'll have HR pull the offer. We'll call it a structural realignment." I thanked him and hung up. Exactly 20 minutes later, the shouting started upstairs. Brooke was screaming. Ryan was trying to calm her down. Meanwhile, I sat in my sunroom calmly snipping dead leaves off my geraniums. The snip of the shears felt oddly soothing. Soon, Brooke came storming down the stairs, face flushed. "Evelyn, they just rescinded the offer." Out of nowhere. That was my dream job. She waved her phone in my face. "The universe is punishing me. I can feel it." I glanced up at her, then went back to my plants. "Maybe it's not the universe, Brooke. Maybe it's just the consequences of your own choices." She stared at me, completely lost, unable to connect the dots that the toxic woman she'd just blocked was the same one who could have opened that door for her. Ryan stood in the doorway, eyes on the floor, looking like a shadow of himself. Brooke started crying theatrically. "You have no idea what this means. We were counting on that money." I set the garden shears down and stood up slowly. At 68, I was still taller than her when I straightened up. "I know exactly what it means, Brooke. It means the financial arrangement in this house changes starting right now." Ryan opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. You two have lived here rent-free for 2 years, I said. I did it to give you a good start. But since I'm apparently toxic and the family's better off without me, I don't see any reason to keep subsidizing that closeness. I pulled an envelope from my pocket, one I'd prepared weeks earlier. Inside wasn't a lawyer's letter, just a straightforward breakdown of costs. Next month, you start paying a fair share of the utilities and a reasonable amount for the upstairs space. I'm also separating the internet. You'll set up your own account. Brooke gasped. You can't just raise our costs like that, Ryan. Say something. Ryan looked at me, searching for the mom who always caved. She wasn't home today. Mom, this is harsh. Brooke just lost her job, he said quietly. No, Ryan. I corrected him gently, but firmly. Brooke lost her professionalism before she ever walked in the door. I'm simply protecting my peace from people who publicly disown me. I headed into the kitchen to start my dinner. Conversation over. That night, I heard them arguing upstairs, not angry, just desperate. Brooke was slowly realizing her online fantasy world had smashed into the very real walls of my house. I slept better than I had in months. Clear boundaries have a way of giving you your energy back. The next morning, there was a note on the kitchen door. Can we talk? I left it there and went for a walk. At the bakery, I ran into Mrs. Hargrove, a neighbor who'd seen Brooke's post. She gave me a pitying look. Oh, Evelyn, that whole internet thing is just awful. Social media can be so vicious, can it? I smiled politely. Words carry weight, Mrs. Hargrove. If you throw them around lightly, you'd better be ready to carry what comes back. I bought my sourdough and headed home. When I got back, I noticed Brooke had tried the cheap trick of taping the upstairs locks so I couldn't secure the doors. A little power play. I didn't call a locksmith. I just peeled the tape off and tossed it in the trash. When she came downstairs at lunch, she looked pale. Evelyn. I deleted the post, she said flatly. I'm sorry. I was just frustrated. I smoothed my apron. Online apologies are like dust in the wind, Brooke. They don't change the facts. You blocked me to find your peace. I accept that. So from now on, we live separately. I told her the shared laundry room was now mine alone. Her washer would have to move into their bathroom. It won't even fit, she protested. Then you'll need to figure something out, I replied. It was fascinating how fast her confidence cracked once the free perks started disappearing. Ryan came out to the garden that afternoon. Mom, she doesn't mean it. She's just impulsive. I looked at my son with real sadness. Impulsiveness is a luxury when you're young, Ryan. At 30, it's called having no backbone. You stood by while she insulted me and said nothing. That was your choice. My choice is to make this house mine again. I handed him the key to the storage room where Brooke's extra boxes were stacked. Clear it out by Sunday. I need the space for a new hobby. He didn't ask what hobby. He could feel the shift. Monday morning, the house was strangely quiet. Normally, Brooke would have been rushing out for her big new job. Instead, she sat on the patio, staring into space. Without that director-level salary, easily 6 figures, and with the new cost-sharing, their Magnolia lifestyle wasn't sustainable anymore. I watched from the kitchen window as she tried calling someone, probably to vent about me. But my network is small and tight. The same relatives who'd liked her post were the ones who called me when they needed a little help for their own projects. I'd politely told them all that my cash was tied up in home renovations right now. Suddenly, their enthusiasm for Brooke's liberation dried up. Nobody wanted to risk upsetting the woman who quietly kept the family finances afloat. Brooke approached me around lunchtime. We need to talk about money, Evelyn. Ryan's salary won't cover everything if we're suddenly paying rent on top of it. I handed her a glass of water. I'm not asking for full rent, Brooke. Just a fair contribution. If that's too much, there are some nice 2-bedroom apartments over in South Seattle that would fit your budget better. The look on her face was something else. To her, South Seattle felt like exile. "You're kicking us out," she asked, voice shaking. "I'm not kicking anyone out," I said calmly. "I'm just creating the conditions for a life without the toxic mother-in-law." "If I'm that bad, you should want as much distance as possible, right?" She had no comeback. The logic was airtight. I started rearranging furniture downstairs, finally carving out a proper studio for the painting I'd neglected for years, because Brooke had taken over the space with her yoga mats. When she saw me neatly packing her things and setting them by the door, she started to protest, until one look from me stopped her. I wasn't asking permission to breathe in my own home anymore. Ryan helped her carry boxes without a word. He finally understood the natural order had been restored. The next few days had a strange kind of hustle to them. Brooke was frantically applying for jobs, but word of the big agency pulling the offer seemed to have spread quietly through the industry. Seattle's marketing scene is smaller than it looks. I'd often see her standing in the driveway with red eyes. Ryan picked up extra hours to plug the holes. I stayed consistent. I cooked only for myself. The smell of a good roast would drift through the house while they ate frozen pizza upstairs. It wasn't cruelty, it was a lesson in standing on your own feet. One evening, there was a knock on my door. It was Ryan looking worn out. "Mom, can't we just go back to normal?" I invited him in and offered him a seat. "What's normal? Ryan me paying for everything and getting insulted for it. Or you watching your wife humiliate me in public and staying silent." He looked down. I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't want to fight. I reached over and touched his hand. Not wanting a fight often means accepting the injustice. You let Brooke cross the line. Now you two have to find your way back, or find your own path. He told me Brooke was thinking about posting a public apology to salvage her reputation. I gave a soft laugh. If she does it for her reputation, it's worthless. She should do it for her own soul. Ryan left, looking thoughtful. Soon after, a new post appeared from her, just a plain white background, no selfie. I made mistakes. I turned private family issues into content for attention. That was wrong and disrespectful to the woman who's given us so much. The comments were sparse. Her former cheerleaders had gone quiet. Real accountability isn't very popular online, but for me, it was a start. I didn't unblock her yet. I wanted to see if actions would follow words. The next Saturday, I woke to the sound of a lawnmower. I looked out and saw Brooke in old work clothes carefully edging the grass the way I always did. It was the first time she'd helped in the garden without me asking 3 times. I stepped outside and watched for a while. When she noticed me, she turned the mower off. "I figured you could use a break today," she said uncertainly. I nodded. The edges are a little uneven, but the effort matters. It wasn't glowing praise, but it wasn't criticism either. Just truth. Later, I found a basket of fresh produce from the farmer's market at my door with a note. "I'm learning. You can't just take energy, you have to give it too. Thank you for not throwing us out yet." I accepted the vegetables, but kept cooking for myself. Trust is like fine china. Once it breaks, you can glue it, but the cracks never fully disappear. That afternoon, Brooke asked if I'd look over her resume. I studied her for a long moment. "I'll review it, Brooke. But I won't make any calls for you. This path is yours to walk." We sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours. I was firm, cutting fluff and arrogant phrasing. She swallowed her pride and listened. For the first time in years, we had a real conversation that wasn't centered on her needs. We talked about professional etiquette and the power of discretion. I could see she carried a deep fear of failure that she'd masked with arrogance. But pity isn't the foundation for a healthy relationship. Respect is. When she left, I left the kitchen door cracked open, a small sign that the total freeze was beginning to thaw. Weeks passed. Brooke landed a position at a smaller agency. The pay was noticeably lower than the original offer, and the commute was twice as long. She didn't complain. Every morning she left at 7 and came home late. Ryan started taking on more around the house to support her. Their dynamic had shifted. They were partners facing a challenge instead of beneficiaries of my goodwill. I watched her consistency. She kept tending the garden every weekend. She paid her share of the bills on time without reminders. One evening, she knocked while I was painting. "Evelyn, may I come in?" I nodded. She looked around the studio. "You're really talented. Why did you hide this for so long?" "Maybe because there wasn't room for my dreams when I was constantly solving yours," I answered honestly. She sat on the edge of the sofa. "I kept wondering why you didn't just tell me you knew the firm. You could have spared me the embarrassment." I set my brush down. "Would that have helped? You would have seen it as weakness. You would have thought you could do whatever you wanted because I'd always bail you out." She looked down. "You're right. I never would have learned what respect really means." In that moment, I realized my firm response had been the only language she understood. Sometimes tough love is the deepest kindness. Ryan joined us with tea. For the first time in months, the three of us sat together without that heavy undercurrent of tension. I told them about my plans to upgrade the house next year, energy-efficient renovations. There'll be dust and noise, but if we work together, it can stay our home. Brooke glanced at Ryan, then at me. "We'll help Evelyn, wherever we can." It wasn't a forever promise, but it was honest. I felt the weight of the past months finally lifting from my shoulders. Fall arrived and the river ran high with rain. Inside the house, it was warm and dry. Brooke had passed her probation at the new job. To celebrate, she brought home a nice bottle of wine. We sat in my living room with the fireplace crackling. "I got a compliment from my boss today," she said proudly. "He said my grounded approach is refreshing." I smiled. Grounded is pretty rare in marketing. We laughed together, light, easy laughter with no edge. Ryan looked more relaxed than he had in ages. He'd taken charge of their finances and they'd started a savings plan. They weren't scheming to take over the house anymore. They were quietly building their own foundation inside my walls, but on their own terms. I'd unblocked Brooke on social media. Her profile had changed. No more dramatic quotes or victim posts. Instead, there were garden pictures, work updates, and the occasional shot of a cake we'd baked together. The relatives were confused by the sudden peace, but I offered no explanations. "Evelyn," she said, suddenly staring into the fire. "I know I lost the job at Harlan's agency because of you. Ryan told me yesterday." The room went quiet. Ryan looked startled. I stayed calm and took a sip of wine. "And how do you feel about that?" She met my eyes directly, clear and steady. "I think it was the best thing that could have happened. I would have crashed and burned there because I thought I was untouchable. You stopped me before I completely wrecked myself." It was the biggest admission she could make. In that moment, the debt felt settled. I raised my glass. To Growth Brooke, in every form. A year has passed since that Instagram post. The house is renovated, solar panels on the roof, catching what winter sun we get. Ryan and Brooke still live upstairs, but the rules are clear and respected. We're not a picture-perfect family, but we're an honest one. I've learned that my silence isn't weakness. It's space where others can grow if they're willing to pay the price. This morning, I got a text from Brooke. She was on a business trip in Portland, saw an amazing museum and thought of you. "Looking forward to Sunday dinner." I smiled and set the phone down. I don't need validation from the outside world anymore. My house is peaceful again, not because I put up with everything, but because I said enough at the right time. Brooke doesn't post toxic stories anymore. She's learned not to bite the hand that helps you, especially not in public. Ryan has grown more confident too. He speaks his own mind now, even with his wife. And me, I paint, I garden, and I enjoy the quiet in Magnolia. The door upstairs is often closed, and that's a good thing. Privacy is the foundation of mutual respect. When we pass each other in the hallway, the greetings are warm and genuine. Sometimes it takes a clean cut for something stronger to grow. I don't regret a single step, not the call to Harlan, not the hard weeks that followed. I look out at the water. Boats move steadily past, unstoppable. Life is like that. You hold your course even when the wind is against you. And sometimes you have to lift anchor so you don't stay tied to the wrong people. I'm Evelyn. I decide who has a place in my life. That's my freedom, and I earned it the hard way. People often mistake silence for weakness. Only when the consequences hit do they realize. Some of us don't need to say a word. We just make the decision.